The American actor Kevin Hart said, when you've got more than one kid, you just wake up angry. Welcome to this week's Mummafesto, the podcast where parenting and politics combine. My guest this week is the writer and campaigner Natasha Pearlman. She's now the executive editor of Glamour magazine, but she's been a journalist for over 16 years, both here in the United Kingdom and now in America, leading campaigns and winning battles about the world. She's also one of my oldest friends. Welcome to the Mummafesto, Natasha. Welcome to the Mummafesto, Tash. Now, I need to declare you are one of my oldest friends, as well as being an incredible campaigner, writer, journalist. But also, you were the first person to really warn me about motherhood. What made you want to sound the alarm?
God, remind me now exactly did I warn you about birth, or did I just warn you about how difficult it was to raise children, or was it all of that?
It was a general look of fear. I'm like,
you know what? I think I said to you just before. I'm a big fan of radical honesty, because I think that one of the worst things we do to women is we pretend that things are not what they are, and that goes to birth, that goes to raising children. If you don't tell women the truth, and that goes for each other, we're almost setting people up to fail, because nothing in life is straightforward. And I don't think there's anything we should be afraid of about saying that motherhood is really hard, birth is tough. We do these things because we want to create a new generation and a new family. But yes, I'm sure I scared you. I feel like I was really like, giving birth really sucks. Being pregnant is like carrying an alien inside of you, and raising kids exhausts you. And I still find it really hard, even today.
so just tell us a little bit then about your journey into motherhood and how you came to that conclusion.
I mean, look, I do start from the case, and I've written about this before, that I was very lucky in many ways, that it was an uncomplicated journey in terms of conception and miscarriage. I didn't have those challenges, and I'm incredibly grateful for that, because I know that hadn't been the case for you or for other people.
Yeah, I picked that baton up. I was like,
Yeah.
you have the difficult births, I'll take the difficult getting pregnant one.
But I found it. There's a real ambivalence, and I think that is a really difficult thing to talk about. And I've talked about this with people who have struggled even. And when you get pregnant, you can still feel very ambivalent about what it's doing to your body, and that's okay, because you are aware you're living through this moment where you know your body and your life is changing, and a lot of it is out of control. What happens to your body, how you feel, the morning sickness, it is all grueling. And also, and you face this, and it's very, very real, that there might be a case now in your life where your career is going to stop, or someone's going to look at you differently. And so there is a huge thing. I remember being pregnant and thinking, I just don't want to not be me anymore. And I'm terrified that I'm going to be looked at differently the minute my body, and I remember hiding it, for as long as I could, just for myself even. I didn't really want to deal with the fact that life was going to change, and I would be confronted with things maybe that I didn't like, that people would look at me differently. And I remember you get bigger and people want to touch you on the train, and people think that you are almost like, I don't know, something to be looked at and prodded and
I felt very much
maybe.
like I felt very much like the fatted calf. Like people would come and touch my tummy and be like, "Whoa, this is going to be good for Christmas."
I got huge at the end, and people would really come up to me on the train and be like, "Oh, you are massive." It's like, thank you, great, appreciate that. But I think I struggled with that identity shift. And I remember right at the beginning of becoming a mum, I just was very much like, I want to still be me. And then, of course, I had this very traumatic birth where, and it's very relevant right now because of all the talk, all of the parliamentary groups and the recognition on birth trauma and how it has to change. It happens to too many people, but like many, many women, I had a very difficult birth. And then you feel like your body is no longer yours, and you still want to be you, but you're also trying to raise a baby. It's very difficult. And I do think it's okay. And I think I was very lucky because my mum was a psychologist, and I was very ready, and so was my sister. I was ready to feel ambivalent about the baby in front of me. And I wasn't freaked out in that first maybe day or two afterwards, when I wasn't feeling this huge, overwhelming wave of love. I was just broken. And so I do feel lucky that I was prepared for that. But I think that's the thing, like the becoming a mother journey changes who you are and it changes your purpose, but it also, I didn't want it to change me. And I think about everything that I do needs to feel really worth it. And I'm still driven, maybe even more driven than I was before. But I am very, very clear that every job, every decision that I make, the result has to be worth it, because I'm going to be away and I don't want to be a full-time mum, but I'm still going to be away from my kids. And I feel like maybe you have that as well. Like what you do has to feel worth it.
I don't think any of us can win. And you talk there about the birth experience that you had, and you've written very powerfully about that and how much of a shock it was to you at the time, because maybe we don't prepare women for the possibility that birth can be really difficult. Just tell us a little bit more about what it was like and how people reacted to you talking about it.
Okay, well, I mean, my birth, I talk about this, the first birth in particular, it felt like it existed in a darkness. And everything about those 3 days was dark. I was in a windowless room. I just existed in this like blacked out moment of pain for 3 days. I had a back-to-back baby, which no one really talks enough about again, which is that like you don't progress with your labor. The pain is like really nothing else. It was so painful I couldn't even speak. There were no sounds that came out. And I think that you go through that, and then I had forceps delivery, which I had actually asked for, and it was written down in my birth plan, no forceps, and I would have done anything, but I hadn't eaten for 3 days. I'd really had my agency taken from me in that experience, and I think that really opened my eyes to how little control women are given in birth. And I think in any other operation that you have, you would be consulted throughout the process. You would be offered pain relief. You would be part of the decision-making process. And I get that there is a baby that they are very focused on keeping alive and bringing out into the world. But I do feel that I experienced something that really took away any control I had. And yes, I'm a control freak, but I don't think that should be the basic level that, we should all have no control. And I think that birth is very much something that happens to women and isn't something that is happening in conjunction with women. And so for me, it was very personal to me. I know that many people have a very, very supportive midwife birth. Like I felt that the midwives and the doctors weren't talking to one another. The collateral damage was me. Physically, I was ruined down below. They made me push before I was dilated. They pulled out a baby with forceps. Like my husband talked about this, even though I didn't want him down in the end. I didn't want to see, but he was right out by me. And the doctor put her foot up on a table and she couldn't get the baby out. And she had these huge forceps and it took a lot of pulls. And I was flat on my back. I was high as a kite on 2 morphine shots. I actually haven't really said this out. I mean, I know this sounds insane. I thought I was having a panda. Like I was so high. I was like, I'm having a black and white furry animal, and I'm gonna just have to be okay with it. I just had I was so out of it.
Have you been able to go to a zoo since then? Have you been able to go?
No, I don't know. I actually haven't seen a panda hilariously since then. Real life one, but I mean that's how off the scale, like out of touch with reality I was. And they handed me a baby, and I was like, oh my god, I have a baby, and I couldn't feel anything, and I was completely swollen, and I didn't even know, I don't think, until I was 6 weeks postpartum, how many sets of stitches I had. And my doctor said, I think I had 3. And no one says anything to you about this. And I couldn't, it hurt so much. And I was a mess. And I think I lost so much of my happiness in those first 6 weeks of having a baby. I would have panic attacks, like just walking to the tube, because I didn't know what happened and I couldn't be out in public. And it was so, again, and what it did, it clarified to me, was that we do not treat women as equals in the birthing process. And this whole idea of not telling women about birth is deeply anti-feminist, because we are almost disempowered by this idea that you can just breathe out a baby. And maybe some people can, but tell people the truth, which is maybe why I scared you so much. But tell people the truth so that they know that there could be the worst, But actually, maybe it won't be, and let them know that there are things that they can ask for if it doesn't go right. I didn't have any of that information, and I didn't know, and I really think it would be different. And I shouldn't have had to, maybe I didn't have the money to do it, but I shouldn't have had to maybe hire a doula to be the one to advocate on my behalf. I should have been empowered to advocate on my behalf. So that's kind of, that was a real great way to enter motherhood.
I think that's why it's so powerful. And I would pay tribute to the work that Theo Clark, who's a Conservative MP, has done about birth trauma and that debate that is happening now in the UK Parliament. One of the things I thought was incredibly powerful is you went public about your experience. You were a senior leader within the British women's magazine industry. So you were managing that birth trauma, but also wanting to work, wanting to keep your status, be part of also changing things. And I think what's so powerful now is that conversation seemed very shocking to people. And I remember you writing about how shocking it was to people that you were talking about it. It's taken, 10 years for something to come forward and that pace of change. How does that make you feel?
I mean, I'm glad it's happening. I feel I actually sat on one of the all-party parliamentary groups. I think it was back in 2018. I attended one when I was living in the UK. I will say the reaction I had from writing that piece, I think kind of gives me goosebumps even now. I had thousands of letters. I had letters from women in their 70s. I had letters from men in their 70s saying that they had seen what happened to their wives. They'd only ever had to have one. They'd only been able to have one child as a result afterwards. I feel like this isn't, and the sad thing to me is that this is not a problem that's 10 years old. Judging from the letters I have, this is a decades-old problem. And birth has really not moved on in those decades, like 50, 60, 70 years ago. We birthed the same. And actually, interesting, a lot of the work I do here, and I've spoken to a lot of people who talk about birth trauma, like the history of how birth is, the way that we birth babies was almost created by men, and it was created by men testing on white women, and also we don't think about how we test and how we birth babies for women of all backgrounds, all races, all countries. We've kind of based this whole system on a practice that's really very old, and in some ways maybe it does work. There's one way to get a baby out, but no one's really looking at what do different cultures do, what do different women do, and just what do people who give birth want. And I do think that is not very centered. And I had thousands of people write to me. I had people share very, very intimate, people I didn't know, people I did know, share very, very intimate stories about their own experiences. Someone said to me, I cut this article out and I gave it to my husband because I couldn't explain how I felt. Someone else said I took it with me to the hospital and made sure I got a C-section. So it had different responses, but I feel disappointed that it's taken so long because it shouldn't have had to have such a drumbeat of women every single year talk about this. And I'm glad it's being listened to, and I'm glad someone from the Conservative Party is really taking this on because they are in power and they've been in power for a very long time. And it shouldn't have taken them this long, and it shouldn't have just been, because I've had a baby, I know. But that's where we are.
But you use that word drumbeat there, and that feels to me a very good word for what you have done. So you are somebody I met because you were using the platform that you had within what was called the women's media. And I always think people use that in a very pejorative sense. It's not at all. It's a space in which different voices and different stories can be heard. And that drumbeat for change. Just tell us a little bit about your experience in that world on issues like this, on that concept of motherhood.
Well, I wanted to say very quickly that no one talks about men's media pejoratively. So I'm very, very proud that I work for women's media. I think that, as often more than half the population, we have the ability to make sure that conversations that impact our half of the population are right at the forefront. So I'm super proud, and I will always stand up for everything. And I find it frustrating because sometimes it is easy to dismiss. It's just a women's issue. And I will say that was hard at the beginning because for a long time, and I think media has shifted, but for a long time, media has been very male-centered. Male leaders. It's still the case that a lot of media is led by men, but that is changing. And I do see that leadership shift. And so maybe part of the fact that we are being taken seriously and that finally government are starting to listen is because women have taken leadership positions across the spectrum that people understand that women change the vote again and again. If you think even back to Blair, the women elected him. So, and he recognised that. I mean, it's very, very, 90s and 2000s Blair's babes, like cringe now. But there is a recognition of women's power. And
I'm still holding on to Pamela Anderson and Don't Call Me Babe from barbed wire, because still, women in politics, we get those pejorative terms. It's often in the women's media was one of the few spaces I found where we could actually talk about a policy issue as a policy issue without it being, and what are you wearing to make that case?
Well, I think it's interesting to segue slightly into politics here with this, that I see this in America now all the time, and I'm pretty certain it's the same in the UK. The economy is probably the biggest issue for all voters. And people forget that who powers the economy? In many cases, it's women. If they are not just in the workplace, they're often powering the care economy. So when you think about economy being the most important thing, you cannot look at that as a male issue. It is a women's issue, and that's wrapped up with childcare. That's wrapped up with birth, because if you are losing women from the workforce because of a traumatic birth, because women are historically paid less than men, that's a real problem. And obviously in America, that we have the no paid maternity or parental leave problem. Economy is a woman's problem as much, and it's an all country problem, and it's not, and it's very typically been put in one bucket as men care about the economy because they work. Guess what? We do too, and we are the ones who see the impact of a poor economy much faster. So so I think it ties into everything. And I know I've segued into it, but I think that this is what I'm saying about women's
you've been banging the drum for women in the UK, but you are now doing that in America, because obviously you are now the editorial executive editor of Glamour in America, which is extraordinary. And
we have a big reach.
But also as your friend, like I see you hanging out with Kamala Harris and at the White House so much. Have they given you a pass yet? I mean,
well, I have had a few. It's not so easy as a Brit. You have to go with your passport every time. I haven't just got my New York State ID that I can take. I really have to go through that. I have to be cleared every time.
But tell us about the work that because obviously you are, just as you were banging the drum in the UK for women's rights and for whether it was on birth rights at that time, but also about women in the workplace, now you're banging the drum in America. And I think people listening to this, especially in the UK, would be pretty shocked to hear the campaign that you're working on. So just tell us a little bit about it.
So guess what? America is one of only 6 countries in the whole world that has no parental leave. So at the moment,
no maternity leave, no paid leave at all.
No paternity leave, no parental leave, nothing paid, unless you are lucky enough to work in a company that has it. And I think that's only 27% of working people in America have access to paid leave. And also, I just want to be very clear that often those companies that are bigger, it's the men who have the good paid leave and the women don't. Because obviously out of those 27%, often it's the big corporations that have it. And a lot of those jobs are often weighted towards men. So I do think this is something that is a disproportionate problem for women. So first of all, in America, if you have a baby, you have guaranteed by the country, only if you work for a company with 50 or more people, 12 weeks of unpaid leave, which I just want to be clear is worthless. And I've had this conversation with Democrats and Republican lawmakers often. 12 weeks of unpaid leave is pointless. No woman can afford to not be paid. No parent, no man, no woman, no anyone who has a child adopting or surrogate or birthing has the ability to take 12 weeks of unpaid leave comfortably. And this is the status quo in America. So what I really wanted to do, and it was really also informed by my own personal experience, and actually 1 in 4 women in America have gone back to work within 2 weeks of giving birth. And I know a good few people who've been that way. And you and I both know what it's like after you have given birth. You are bleeding, you are swollen, you may well have open wounds, either if you've had a C-section or if you've had a tear. You will not be healed in any way. And I remember what I went through. And I remember having a panic attack at 8 weeks, walking to the tube. I almost call it the subway, because I am now American. But and I remember that. And then I came here, and was so distressing to me that we didn't have paid leave. So, and I look back and I spent a lot of time in the archives of Glamour, and we've done a lot of work. You know, we were launched in 1939. We have campaigned for the Equal Rights Act. We have campaigned to make sure that the right to abortion is enshrined in law with Roe v. Wade, which obviously, unfortunately, just got overturned. So we're also working on what we can do for that. But paid leave is something that would change the entire history going forward of the country, would change the world for women and men and everyone who has a child in this country, in America. So that's what I wanted to do. Is we started a campaign to pass paid leave. And the one thing I wanted to do is, you can write, you know, I'm a journalist, I've written enough pieces, but I also know that storytelling changes things. And so we followed 8 women through the first 28 days postpartum to show what it's really like and what the impact of paid leave or the lack of paid leave has. And so some of our women, one of our women had a year of full paid leave, and her life was honestly phenomenally supported. And then we had almost all of the other women had no paid leave. One of them thought she had paid leave, and it turns out she didn't after she applied for it after giving birth. It's so complex in this country. A handful of states have it. She was registered incorrectly by her state, so she lost her paid leave. So all this money she thought she was being able to pay her mortgage with, she didn't have. One of our nurses was a single mother by choice. One of our women was a single mother by choice and a nurse, and she didn't have any paid leave. She had accumulated, I think, 2 weeks of holiday, and she had to take the rest unpaid. She was taking from her savings to pay her mortgage, and she ended up having to go back to work. I think it was maybe 10 or 11 weeks postpartum with an open wound, because she just had a bad tear that hadn't healed up properly. So, you know, there are so many sacrifices that people make in this country to raise and have children. And I just can't see that happen anymore. And I cannot stand by and let that happen. So we obviously followed their stories. That article won a couple of awards, and also really opened us up to the administration, who started to take a lot of notice. And we partnered with the Vice President to do a lunch, and we brought our women from the project to her house where they introduced her, and we had a Women's History Month brunch. You know, so I know it's having impact. And, you know, just earlier this year, the president came out at a big rally and committed to passing paid leave. He's put aside a huge amount in the budget, over 300 billion, to do this. So I know that our campaign is being listened to. It's very on the edge, because I don't know if the Republicans won. They have a very different approach to paid leave. They're less into big government, but I still believe that they know the importance of the family. So we hope and pray that this is something that whoever is elected will take very, very seriously.
So you think even if Donald Trump wins, this is still potentially going to happen?
I think it's a difficult conversation, but I do also want to point out that the last progress that was made on paid leave did actually happen under Trump. So, you know, it is something that all parties have failed to achieve on from a federal level, from a national level. But I think Ivanka pushed it forward quite a lot, that federal employees did get 12 weeks of paid leave, which was enacted in 2019 under the Trump administration. But the thing is, for me, that's like, well, it's great for the government employees. It's great for, you know, all the people who work in the White House, but why is it not good enough for the electorate? So I do think, but what I would say is neither party yet have lived up to its promise of supporting families. And I hope that both parties feel the weight of responsibility to change the future for parents. And I hope that, you know, I am hopeful that both parties have to see that, because if you're going to take away a woman's right to an abortion, if you know, which is a very Republican policy, then you also have to see that the opposite is true, which is you need to support the children that are being born, maybe against people's choice.
Well, and you raised that. Obviously, one of the things that we're seeing back here in the UK now is the American debates on abortion are having an impact here on people's sense about abortion access and whether it's at risk. Do you think it's vice versa? So when you come as a British person saying, well, look, you know, we have a paid leave system, there's lots of problems with it, but we do at least have a national policy on paid leave. What's it like been trying to make that argument as a UK person rather than an American?
I feel like the crazy British person, but I actually think I do think it helps. because I've come into many conversations and said, well, I actually had paid leave, and this is how it worked. And I had two different forms of it. I had a company paid leave, I did freelance when I had my second child. So, and that was a much lower amount. And it did frustrate me because I paid tax for so many years and I got, £150 a week. And it felt frustrating after having paid so much into the system for so many years. But we still had it. And I think that's, to me, is, people can't believe it. When I come in and I speak to Americans and I said, well, I had 6 months and it could have taken a year, but I chose 6 months. And in England, people were a bit like, well, you only took 6 months. Here, people can't believe that I had so much time with a baby and cry. I have women who tell me because I'm crazy and I talk to people on airplanes always, all the time. But I've had women, cry to me on a plane and say, I only had 6 weeks. And I had to, and every morning I got on a subway to work and I cried because I said goodbye to my baby. And there's things like, and I explain to people here that, we don't have, in England, and in the UK, yes, you have lactation rooms and you have rooms where you can pump, but they're much less necessary in the UK because often by the time that people have gone back to work, the baby, if you think about how many times we fed our babies throughout the day, where by the time I can't remember, God, my kids are so old now, but I think really they're only feeding a couple of times a day, morning and evening by 8 or 9 months, because by that time they're on solids. Whereas in the US, everyone has to have a pump room because people go back to work, 4, 5, 6 weeks after having a baby, and your baby's drinking milk like 7 times a day, and everyone's boobs are leaking, and half your day at work is spent pumping, and people are in meetings pumping because they have no other option. And so, so I do think in that respect, having had that experience, people do stop for a minute and they go, wait, hold on. People don't pump at work. No.
That's like, does it make you feel like Sting in An Englishman in New York? Like having to,
what alternate universe am I living in?
What's it been like moving your family from the UK to America to do the role that you do and the impact it's had?
I mean, it's interesting. My youngest was 1, and she's my little American. She's like, Mom, give me some water. Let me scooter. But she's very, she speaks. I've lost, the English accent's gone, and she feels very American. And I'm glad that I will say, for all of the challenges that I find with paid leave, and that's something that we're actively working to solve. It's very interesting raising American children because I'm so admiring of the school system in many ways here, which teaches these kids so much, which teaches these kids so much confidence. They learn how to make an argument. They learn to present. Last night someone said to my eldest, they said, oh, do you ever get nervous about public speaking? And she looked at them like they had lost their mind. She said, well, of course not. That's when I feel great. She's like, I've got a word for it. It's called nerve-sighted, where I'm nervous and excited at the same time. Because and everyone jokes, Americans are so confident and they're so outgoing. That's really instilled into these children from the beginning. And I don't know if it's like a shift in societal expectations, especially of young girls, just in general, that they are much more confident, but I see it and I'm trying to bottle it in because at 10 she's still got it in a way that I didn't have it at 10, especially growing up in the UK. And she loves to be out there, and all the kids, they bring them out. My youngest is super shy, but 6 months in kindergarten, she's a different child. She's ready to be out in the world in a way that I never thought she would. And so there are real gains that I've had from this that they don't see probably, and I feel like they don't. My eldest has a campaign to bring me back to the UK, constant, every day.
Well, you know that I'm going to join her because I just think we need your campaigning star power. But this podcast is called the Mummafesto, and obviously we are going to face a general election here in the UK. So of all the things that you've been working on, maybe what you've learnt from America, or maybe something you see here from a distance, if there was one thing you'd want to see on the agenda for the UK general election, is it teaching confidence to girls in schools? I don't know. What is the one thing you would like to see us? And if we can tempt you back, would you be campaigning on right now?
Gosh, that's actually a really hard question. I still, do you know what? I still come back to how we create a workplace. And I know that, you know, Anna's done this a bit with the flex appeal, but it's less about that for me, but it's about somehow.
We should absolutely give a shout out to Anna Whitehouse. And
Yeah,
Mother Pucker is an amazing woman who's led on this campaign about flexible working.
because I mean, I almost, it's something, it's that, but it's also more than that, because I think for me, and I come back to what, and I do think shared parental leave in the UK has done it, although I know not enough men probably take it, but it changes the game. And I do think it's somehow about leveling the playing field. And, you know, and I want the workplace to just be more inclusive. And I do think that's a big challenge. And I would say there's something around that. And I would also say how, you know, maybe you're right actually about the confidence in children is how do we change the way, how do we grow young leaders? Because it's all very well for us to be fighting for things, but I actually want my children to grow up in a world where what they're fighting, either they don't need to fight for it or they are the next leaders. And I do think leadership programs for children is something that could be really game changing for the future, because you know it's that line in Barbie, and it slightly depresses me, which is like at some point women have, you know, mothers stand still so their children can see how far they've come. I'm not ready to stand still yet, hence
Good.
why I still live here. But I do think there does come a point at which I want my children to take those steps forward and do what's right for them. And it's how to grow that generation of children who feel, and look, I know it's controversial in the UK, but I'm so proud of my kids' school here. It's so inclusive and not afraid of teaching the kids about the world and teaching children that they can be who they want to be in any and have whatever form that takes. And I do think that we shouldn't be afraid of that. You know, there is so much fear around. I mean, I don't know why, but you know, there's so many things that we're being made in these much more conservative approaching ideologies of being afraid of what the future holds. But we should be opening up the future to our children because they are the ones that will create the new possibilities for us.
Well, I'm pretty sure that when your daughter's campaign is successful, you can lead on that when you come back to the UK, and you'll find a lot of people listening to this who want to join you. So I am definitely in her team. I'll try and do my best to persuade you to come back and bring all that brilliant campaigning experience. But thank you so much, Tash, for joining us today on the Mummafesto. You did scare me. You scared me a bit about birth, but I kept going. So maybe the point is, together we can persist. And if we raise the next generation of leaders, we can both finally get a break and go for a drink. So...
No, exactly. Bring it on. I'll see you soon.
I really hope you enjoyed listening to Tash and all the amazing work that she's doing in America, leading the fight for paid leave, and the difference between here in the United Kingdom and the lessons that we might learn from America. And I hope you pretty much agree with me that we really need her daughter to be successful to bring Tash back to the UK so she can keep campaigning for change. I'm off now to write her a long note about how she really wants to be on a greasy tube, not in a brilliant subway in New York. Please do listen to the next episode of the Mummafesto.